John and John, thank you very much indeed for joining me for this podcast. And I'm really excited about this. One, it's a great opportunity to meet with both of you and discuss things Lean and Six Sigma. And also, it's a bit of a preview to the conference that's coming up in Jersey a little later on this year. And perhaps we'll touch on that and what you bring to it and what you're looking forward to presenting and seeing at that conference. But first, if I may, could I ask each of you to just do a little introduction to yourselves and your background in Lean? So either of you first, I don't mind.
JD?
Okay. Hello, I'm John Dennis.
Yes.
I'm based up here in the northeast of England, where I returned after being raised here. I spent over 20 years in the United States and also in Central America doing project work, mainly in IT projects, but earlier on in process automation for chemical plants, paper mills, and textile factories. I have the privilege of being the chairman of ILSSI. And as you say, we have an annual conference, and this year it is in the island of Jersey.
Excellent. And John Rooney?
Yeah, so John comes under JD, I go under JR. That's how we communicate, because we can get confused. So I'm John Rooney. I started my career as a young apprentice back in, I'm not going to say the year, but quite a while ago, as a young inspection apprentice in 1977 to be exact. I thought it would be a short-term thing. It'll be finish your apprenticeship, move on. I ended up working for General Motors, part of Stellantis, Vauxhall for just over 40 years. So that was, most of my life. At different positions, I was an executive, which it's probably my proudest thing by the age of 29. So by the age of 29, I was flying high. I traveled the world. Probably best places I could say would be South Korea, China. So I got to see things differently. And I suppose my first part of Lean was learning the Lean principles. But in the days when we learned the principles, nobody called it Lean. Mm-hmm. It was this thing coming from America, part of the New Me plan, but it was never called Lean. But as I learned over the years, it was about efficiency, taking waste out and so on. My bit on Lean Six Sigma, I met the famous John Dennis. Mm-hmm. In 2019, the very first conference for the ILSSI, the inaugural conference, absolutely superb. Took my yellow belt exam and failed miserably because I thought the trainer was quite poor. And that John was the trainer, by the way. But, over the years, I've learned, I went to the first, and it's just grown and grown and grown. I train Lean Six Sigma now, I didn't before. And the actual group, the ILSSI, is such a society or institute. There's people from all over the world. You talked about the conference coming up in April 29th and 30th, for anybody listening. And I think John sent me something today. There's 16 different countries. People from 16 different countries will be there. So for me now, Lean Six Sigma is a day-to-day thing, which I love.
Well, I think my opening question to you both, but perhaps start with JD, is, given the fact that you've travelled the world and given the passage of time from, lean early concepts to what it is today, how do you see that it has changed? Is it fundamentally what it was when we were looking at things like Toyota or Motorola? Has it changed quite significantly with potentially the Americanization and commoditization of it so that it becomes something that we can sell to the masses? Because I rather get the impression that in its early stages, it was more of a philosophy, whereas later on it became more of a recipe. And I'm just interested in how things have evolved and grown and maybe changed with different countries and how they adopt them. So starting with JD, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It has changed. We're learning all the time. one of the main principles of lean is continuous improvement. And of course, we're improving the skill set, the tool set, the methodology all the time. And even the early academics who wrote about it back in the 1990s admit that what they wrote about then, they now, if they wrote about it again, they wouldn't do the same thing. We have learned through many conferences from great individuals that in the beginning, 1990s, there was the idea that we need to focus on non-value-added activities and remove them. They called that waste, and the Japanese called it muda. Mm-hmm. And that was the revolutionary new idea in a way then, okay, that in every process there's things we should be doing and things we shouldn't be doing. We need to identify the things we shouldn't be doing and remove them. And that was, the idea. Now, as we've moved on with time, people have realized that the people working in the process for a start are far more important to whether a process is being improved, whether a process is efficient, how the people behave in the process, interact in the process, whether management has respect for the people is very, very important. And that the people are continually learning and problem solving. So problem solving mentality has become far more important in the mindset, in the methodology. And so I think we've recognized there'll always be waste, there'll always be problems. It's not just about finding it and removing it, but how we approach that in a problem-solving mindset.
And JR, you touched on your own travels. I'm in my background, I've been to Korea as well, and I'm just really interested in the cultural dynamic because, again, Lean and Six Sigma seems to straddle both worlds, both being a product of process, but also one of culture and almost philosophy. And of course, different nations, different cultures have different approaches. What differences have you seen and experienced?
So, it's been to me, the building blocks of Lean have never changed. Mm-hmm. Back in the Newey days of 1984, but it's how cultures have interpreted them building blocks and how they've used them. I think, to give you an example, the way, should we say, the way the UK works in manufacturing. And I was in Vauxhall for most of my life, but you had a team leader, you had the team worker, team leader, supervisor. But if you went to a Polish plant, they all worked one level up. Mm-hmm. So in essence, they were much clearer on what they wanted to do. They owned it. In my role, I had lots of Kaizen teams and Kaizen people. In Poland, it was the group workers themselves. To give an example how they would run it. So you've got a new station. You've got a brand new station set up. It's a pilot. So the station says a 90-second takt. So you would think they've got to put enough work in for 90 seconds. That's what you think. Not in Poland. Poland would put enough work in for 100 seconds and tell the team that are doing the job when they're being trained, get the 10 seconds out. So they build a natural, efficient process so differently. You talk about South Korea. To be honest with you, I thought, when you look at that, I mean, it was many, many years ago when I went, I thought they were quite slack. Mm-hmm. I thought they were quite slack. 5S, for me, three things: 5S, visual management, standardized work. They're your building blocks. You've got to start off with them. And I was expecting to see something magnificent. I suppose the difference was there, labor was very cheap, very, very cheap. So they could have an operation with 3 men on, which what I'd probably time and put 1 man on. I think one other place to quote would be Brazil, which I went to an old engine plant, and it was 40 years old, but it was like new.
Wow.
Still smell the coolant at the machine shop, but it was 40 years old and it was still like you. And I suppose John said it about respecting people. It's the one thing, why did Numi fail in America? Basically, the Americans just said, we haven't got time. Respect for people. And they cut past it. But the one thing about that Brazilian plant, I'll always remember, when you drove into it, it was like going into a park. I could never understand why. And every new person that joined that plant was asked to plant a tree. So all through the years, it was like a park. So they look at it differently. And I think John said respect for workers. And the one thing I learned from Toyota is people should come to work to think. And in a lot of European, that's not what it's about.
And that's interesting. I'd like to build on that because you mentioned a couple of the techniques, I suppose, rather than tools. And, you know, the combination of Lean Six Sigma provides you really quite a large kit bag of possible things that you would consider. If you had to pick, say, just 3 things out of that rather large kit bag of possibilities, JD, what were the 3 things that you would pull out of the kit bag and say, those are the essential things that I would start with, everything else I could build from there?
Yeah, and I'd like also to the opportunity to build on what John said in the future, so we don't forget about this idea of either loading something up so that a worker can only just keep up, which is a mindset which some companies have, and actually is not lean at the end of the day. So there's a good conversation there. So I like a lot of the Six Sigma statistical tools that have been around since the 1920s and 30s, but are still very effective. So a run chart which tracks the value of a process variable over time, and looking at the pattern that makes, the variation in the pattern, whether the pattern is increasing in an upwards direction, decreasing in a downwards direction. If there's patterns within the patterns, if there's subgroups of data that seem to be doing different, have different characteristics, very, very good visual tool for how a process is behaving. And then you can build upon a run chart to make a control chart where you actually look at the points in relative to a number of standard deviations from the mean average of the points. So how much is the variation away from the mean average? Really useful. Looking at the shape of data using a simple histogram is a wonderful tool that people don't use in a lot of companies. And again, the histogram will show you the shape of the data, but then you can put in specification limits on the histogram or tolerance limits that give you then an idea, is the process doing, is it well centered? Is the variation too much? So those are 2 very common Six Sigma type tools that can be applied in any business, can be applied in a bank, in a supply chain, in a hospital, as well as in a factory. One of the simplest lean tools that is built upon the concept of this thing called 5S, which is workplace organization. A lot of people, if you can look up 5S, we won't go into that now, but part of that is having a very visual workplace that people can see the state of the work, see what needs to be done, what is missing, can find things when they want it. So visualization can be obviously charts and, you know, messages, but it's also just how you have your workspace set out. What does your desktop look like? What does the floor look like? What do the walls look like? Is there anything on the walls of interest? Color coding things. Very, very powerful. That we use our eyes, you know, at work it's the most powerful way to have a signal, right? Visualization. So I would say you want to be using these time series charts, run charts, control charts, histograms, which can then be used with tolerance limits upper and lower, and then just have a very visual workplace. I would say are my favorite three.
There's some points that I'd like to expand upon there, but JR, what would you add to that list?
I suppose when I'm probably prior Lean Six Sigma. I'm probably lean. I mean, I'm if you cut me in half, I'm probably 75% lean. John already mentioned on it 5S, and people take 5S that it's just a simple. They think it's a brush and clean up operation. In other words, they think it's a tidy up. It's so much more than that. As John says, that having your equipment in the right place, having the equipment that you need, and I think we talk about industry, but 5S in most offices is atrocious. You know that. You go into a solicitor's, how do they find what they're seeing? It's stacked up high. But for me, so I'd say certainly 5S. The other for me is standardized work. Standardized work for me, fundamentally, how do you know what you're doing if you haven't got a standard operation? How do you know the detail? How do you train somebody new? How do you make sure you're following the standard operation? It's for me, and that people would say, well, yeah, but that's for manufacturing. Well, no, it's not. We had people in offices that had standardized work because you just come in and decide what you're doing. And I think the last one is workplace organization. Is for me when you get to the point of material or in an office, my desk is I'd call it 5S, probably a little bit not good there, but you need to be able to fundamentally reach what you need. We had, I suppose, one of the most important things for an operator, we had a 180-degree zone. It's called the green zone. So you imagine a 180-degree circle. The operator shouldn't have to step out that circle. If he's stepping out the circle, he's got too much walking, there's too much weight, or he's having to go for material. So I think the 5S one for me is, wherever I go, it's the first thing I look at. I cannot help it. And then when we get into the statistics side, I was always a statistics buff because I was in a measuring room, a fine measuring room, that all I did was, I did the standard for slip gauges across the plant. So that sort of thing. So measurement for me and statistics. And John said the simple control chart, it tells you a story. It tells you a story, but you have to read it.
Yeah, John actually mentioned, we talking earlier about measurement system analysis. So analysis of your measurement system is critical.
Yeah.
What are the factors of variation in your measurement system? The people that are measuring, the equipment, the environment, all of these things are affecting the measurement that you're making.
So I'm interested in that. If we expand upon that, because we did touch a little earlier about the importance of people.
Yeah.
So controversially, we could suggest people are all sorts of things. We could suggest people are a component. We could suggest people are a process. We could suggest that people are the design architect of solutions, or actually they're part of the implementation of the solution. And actually how we view people, how we train people, how we use people, how we measure people when we talk about systems, I think that's really quite interesting. And I wondered, what differences have you seen of different organizational approaches to their people and how they value them, how they train them, and how they use them, either as architects or as effectively machine components, part of the tool set?
Yeah. So, I'll take that to start with, John, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Let's go down the path of the Japanese early on after the post World War II, when they were rebuilding, developed a system of using workers in what were called self-managing work groups or quality circles. So these were autonomous groups of people that were working in the same area. They had a supervisor, but generally the work group would be making decisions itself in connection with the supervisor, but separate from management, separate from what you would call the middle management or the upper management. So they were given that authority to make decisions. And that is a fundamental difference between a lot of Western companies where the managers do the thinking and it's a command and control structure. So this is part of lean that is critical, is that you have to listen to the workers, allow them to think, allow them to make decisions and implement their own decisions and try things. So in a cycle of trying, doing, and learning, and then trying again to improve. I mean, John's worked with both systems, right? You've seen it done well and badly.
Yeah, the thing is about it, I suppose, I don't want to make this all about the Japanese, but unfortunately a lot of it revolves back to them. Is John talked about quality circles. We call them Kaizen teams or Kaizen groups. So if you're running a Kaizen workshop and you wanted one person from each production line forever, whatever, the biggest problem in Japan, the people were released, they did the workshops, they presented it back to senior management, they made improvements. What happened in Europe in a lot of occasions, we haven't got enough people to release them. And I'm serious, that was one of my major griefs, that I'd want to run a workshop, I've got all the ideas from the teams, let's run a workshop, 2 hours, 4 hours, and they'd say, absentees not very good, so I'm sorry, you can't have anybody.
And it's not just any workshop, it's a problem-solving workshop. Somebody's identified a problem, right? And you pull people together to solve the problem.
Yes.
And then we decide the management say, well, we'd rather just live with the problem than take people off to fix the problem.
Yep. It's in their own destiny, as John said. You say, well, we're going to fix X. That doesn't matter. I'll live with that for now. I can't release the people.
I'd like to expand on that with some lived experience of my own here, and I'm just really interested to how you would tackle this. In an organization, you might pick someone from HR, sales and marketing, and finance, amongst others, to participate in a Kaizen event. The challenge becomes, when they turn up, they're sitting there saying, I'm representing the folks back home in HR, and I better not do anything that upsets the folks back home in HR. Likewise, the people in sales and marketing, likewise, the people in finance. And so their loyalty, their patronism, their focus is, I've got to go back to my originating department, so I'm going to toe their line rather than your line, because you're temporary. I mean, that's quite an interesting part of the social contract. It's a little bit about organizational culture. How do you manage that? What's your experience of that type of scenario?
For me, is no matter what sort of group you're going to get, your first hour is going to be knocking some walls down. Because you're going to get, in a lot of cases, John will say the same. They end up, I'm on a Kaizen workshop, but I don't know why. I've just been told to report here. So you've got to break down them walls first, is to get them. I always say, if we're doing brainstorming, for example, we've got a specific issue that is hitting a number of departments. You've got to make it clear what's said in here stays in here. So if you say something, well, our department, well, I say it at a later stage, but it doesn't come from them. So you've got to make them feel really comfortable no matter what they say in that room. And I've had some interesting things. You've got to make them feel that they're comfortable and be able, and what they say will take notice of, because in a lot of occasions on that, the group will say, oh, you're talking about the old issue. Oh, we've talked about that for years. They don't want to know. And you've got to get past that, to be honest with you, Tim. You've got to get past it. But one past it, you'll find some fantastic ideas from the team. And if they don't want to take it forward, because I'm protecting HR, give it to me. I'll present it to the CEO. So you sort of shortcut it. Yeah, that's how I do it anyway.
Yeah.
JD, similar experiences?
Internal politics, yeah, can be very destructive, and that starts at a senior leadership level. The culture that's created by senior leaders and their team, whether they're trying to defend their realm, and how they're rewarded. Of course, how you reward people drives behavior. Are you rewarded for the performance of your department, or are you rewarded for the performance of the company, of the system?
Yeah.
You need good leadership skills. You need people that are trying to solve the problem and know how to bring people with them. Explain what's in it for them. What, they're not sure why they should help. Right? Explain that if we work in this way, eventually there's going to be a problem that is really important to you, and you want people to help you solve the problem you have. And initially, if you've had a bad culture, it's very difficult to get them on board. It needs a few wins. You need to have a few successes before people get it. They don't get it to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very difficult when you first start, and that's why you need coaching. You need people that have experienced it and to help, and then you sort of let them go and do it themselves.
And I think this kind of lends itself to something you started a little earlier when you're talking about making things visible. And I suppose to a certain extent, it depends what industry you're in. But if you take, for example, the non-tangibles like financial services or legal or compliance or something like that, it's actually really difficult sometimes for the work to be visible. And if you can't see that there's a problem, you probably won't necessarily admit to there being a problem or even recognize that there's a problem. What do you think are the real challenges in organizations having visibility over their challenges? Perhaps JR, would you like to start with that?
I'll just go step back once on what we've just said. The other way for me to get a team involved, whenever I'm doing a workshop,
mm-hmm.
I get the top boss to open the workshop and explain why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like it. But I always get an early feel, if they don't like it, is it really going to be a success? Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, if you can get the boss to say it's an open meeting, we'll talk about it, we want your ideas, that makes it click. Can you repeat the other question, please, Tim?
Well, it is linked to that, really. It is about visibility, and visibility is about good leadership. It is about standing up. It is about accountability. But it is also that transparency, being able to see things as they are, which I think is more difficult in non-tangible industries. Take, for example, financial services. I mean, if you've got a huge pile of inventory in a manufacturing plant, it's fairly obvious you've got some challenges around theory of constraints. But in finance, it might be less obvious.
But if John would tell you, if you, in something like that, the first thing I'd like to do is a value stream. Just tell me how this piece of paper goes from the start of the office to when it goes out the door. For example, if it was an invoice, mm-hmm. and get them up. And the way we do it, I'd put a roll, the whole side, length of the whole classroom or whatever we're in, meeting room, start off and put all the variables in. And it's only then when you think, well, because I don't know their process, I'll say, well, why would you do that? Well, we've always done it this way because it's been like that since 1934. And it's only then when you start, so is that an issue? Oh, yeah, it's a big issue. So are people aware of the issue? Are they not aware of the issue? Well, not really. Because at the end of the day, if they meet their financial and they're still making profits, it becomes hidden. But you've got to make it visible. And that, for me, as a team, is either use a value stream, because I think once you show, and I think Brian Butler is a good friend of ours, did an invoice at a solicitor's once, and believe it or not, in a small solicitor's, the invoice hit 42 desks over a period of time, just to get approved. So that you've got to make it, so you've got to change it to something visual that they can see.
I just want to share one short anecdote on that. Okay. It's the measles one.
I
Every
mean,
time you pick up a piece of paper, put a red dot on it. Okay. And if the thing looks like it's got measles, it's being over processed.
yes, very simple, but very effective.
JD, I mean, what are your thoughts on, because it's you really started this thought train on visualization, visibility, being able to see the problem for what it is. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's about seeing the whole picture. And so many people at work only see such a small amount of the process. They are used to, and they almost feel comfortable about not wanting to know what's outside their little job, right? It gives them that comfort. Okay, I'm good at this thing. This is what I do. This attitude of that's not my job. This is the boundary of my job, and I don't want to step outside. I don't get it's beyond my pay grade. These sorts of things are profoundly, powerful and evident in most companies that people feel that way. If you can make them see a big picture by education, it's about taking the time to explain what is on either side of them, right? Break down that wall. Let's see what's on that side and understand what other people are going through. But that takes a little bit of time and energy to explain that, but it's worth doing. So getting people to walk the whole line, or taking time for them to meet the other people in the plant, very important. And we lose that actually with working from home, where before you would meet with people in the cafeteria and you'd talk to Joe from supplies or customer service, because you just naturally meet them, and you don't do that when you work from your computer.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit, because when we talked in the preliminary, when we got together for a chat about this, we actually talked about systems thinking, whole systems, a systemic approach which goes beyond the process, which hypothetically could be quite silo based. And system thinking is, as you allude to, much, much broader. We do have people who specialize in their particular area, but increasingly now we're seeing AI, we're seeing technology, we're seeing automation that sometimes makes systems or processes a bit of an unseen black box. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think in just picking up on John's last point, before we go into AI, the silo mentality, it's an uncertainty, isn't it? Let's admit, I've got my job. I'm comfortable with my job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what I'm doing and how it affects the next operation, with it being an office, with it being a factory. I'm comfortable. Nobody's questioning what I'm doing. I get paid every month. And it's that you've got to, for me, get away from the silo mentality. And believe me, in industry, that's even harder to do. It's significantly harder to do. I worked in a plant that had a press shop, a paint shop, a body shop, a general assembly, and a final finish. Tried to get them to talk to each other. It was a nightmare, absolute nightmare. But what the body shop was doing for, say, resin was affecting the paint shop, which is affecting general assembly, but they were all in the little boxes. And for me, in any workshop, you've got to open that out. You've got to expand it and say, look, we're not here to point at Tim or John. We're here to make the process smooth. Smooth out this process that seems to have a lot of bottlenecks, and it's not an easy thing to do.
So let's pick up on that silo busting, whether it's people silos, process silos, or system silos. I mean, how do we do that, particularly that switch from looking at a process to looking at a whole system?
One of the aspects of lean is that you want processes to be fair. That is justice. The fear that people have is that the system is not fair, that they are working harder than other people, or they don't want that risk that they're going to get dumped with the the work. They don't trust. So the word trust now, very, very important, right? They don't trust the system is going to be fair to them.
Mm-hmm.
That is a leadership responsibility, and it's not by words but by actions, and it takes time. You have to show by actions that they can trust you, that if you cooperate, you won't be worse off. You won't get the brunt of the work if you were the one that cooperates. Mm-hmm. So if you're vocal and help, things will be better for you rather than worse. The smoothing out of the process is John talks about the flow. One aspect of lean is you create flow of value. You don't want bottlenecks. You don't want disruptions. And it's, nobody wants to be identified as the bottleneck, as the disruption. And it's that fear that you are going to be, you're going to be caught out. If we dig deeper, you're going to be caught out. And that's why people don't cooperate. And so there has to be patience with people, or when you find things that are wrong, not blaming the operator, but say that this is a process. We're going to work through it. We're going to improve it with your help. And I think again they have to see it in action, see that it works, and trust you that you will do that. And then that comes down to whether you've got short-term management or long-term management. And this is, again, this is a lean concept, right? We want to be thinking in the long-term view of the process rather than the short-term. And if you're changing managers all the time, they don't care that they upset this manager because you're going to be leaving. Yeah. Did you find that problem, John? When there's turnover of leadership, nobody cares.
The auto industry was a crazy thing, because your plant director generally was a guy that's flown in for a short period of time, 2 to 3 years. So the difference that made, and the one word I pick up on, John, is the word trust. That is the hardest thing to build, but you're going to struggle if you're not a good leader and people don't trust you. If we knew a new plant director was changing every 3 years, and it wasn't going on, but we know he's only got 6 months left, just see through it, because he'd be gone. But you didn't know what you were going to get. We had Americans, we had Germans, we had Australians. You just didn't know what you were going to get. Now, for me on that one is, you would think, because you have the General Motors standard that everybody followed, the new boss coming in will be the same, follow the same processes. No, that's not what happened. He'd come in with his own ideas, he or she.
It's interesting, this element of trust. I have seen different applications in terms of measuring benefits. I worked with one organization who wanted to yield 1 million minutes. And the reason they wanted to yield 1 million minutes is because they didn't actually want to say, we're going to reduce headcount by 5 FTE. Yeah. But I've known other organizations that measure everything by FTE, by headcount. Whether or not those people subsequently leave the business, that's their proxy, that's their measure of benefits. And of course, exactly as you say, in terms of trust, that can have a polarizing or even paralyzing effect on staff if they think, if it's FTE, it could be me. Yep. I mean, what are your thoughts on measures for improvement? Because what you choose to measure has a profound effect on people's response.
For me, if you look at KPIs, which are always set, now, unfortunately, in industry, and it is industry, you mentioned the word lean, and just think of, if you look up the word lean, it talks about being thinner. If you just put it in about losing weight, it thinks, when you put lean into Google sometimes, it thinks you're trying to lose weight. So a lot of people, when you hear the word lean, they're cutting back. They're cutting back. And I think John will tell you the same. Any workshop I do, you say, let's make it, lean is not about headcount cutting. Yeah. Lean is not about headcount cutting. Is it used? Is it used across the world for that? Very much it is. But UAS MTM for timings, that's what gives you a real measure anyway on balance and so on. But it's that, for me, that word lean. And for me, it should be about percentage output, number of outputs. I try and explain that. They say, yeah, but we make the right. So it's cost avoidance. So we say, rather than take 2 more operators on, we do that excess amount of work, the more of the work, with the same that we've got today. So it's doing more with what we've got. And I don't want you to work harder, and I'm not going to slog you to death. I want you to work smarter. And if you can get that message over, it does, once it's come across, once you've got them working smarter, and I said it yesterday on a call, is once you get that snowball going, because the guys we keep saying, I call them the foot soldiers, the girls in the office, whether it be the guys on the shop floor, they're your foot soldiers. They keep the business running at the bottom. And it's them that have got to get it flowing, get the snowball going. And believe me, once it's going, it's just a pure heaven to watch. It really is. But it's a little bit of a journey to get there.
JD, what would you add?
Yeah, well, we often have to fight against what is the general name for it, lean. We also have to fight against the name Six Sigma, because it takes an hour before they feel comfortable with the word Six Sigma and why it's called that. Lean, lean was invented in the after the Japanese had been doing things in a lean way for a couple of decades. Lean was invented by the Americans in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The word lean was used really for the first time, actually, in that book there, right? Lean thinking.
Yeah.
And the anecdote goes that they weren't sure to use the word lean. They were going to use the word fragile, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the words on the table. Now, if it's not about reducing headcount, what is it that you're trying to make lean? Well, in fact, what you're trying to reduce is the work in progress and inventories. You're trying to reduce supply, raw materials coming in, parts, raw materials, the work in progress, things that have been started but not finished, which factories notoriously have had a lot of work in progress, and then finished goods as well, that you minimize the amount of finished goods that are not sold. So you don't have warehouses full of stuff that's not sold, right? By making it lean, if you look at the total amount of goods that are in the supply chain or within your system, what is that amount? That needs to be less. And it's the flow of goods that matters, not the total quantity in the system. So it's bloated. Many businesses are bloated, to use that, fat analogy, with goods, with things, with parts, with stuff on shelves, right?
Yeah.
So making things leaner, should not necessarily reduce the number of people at all, but it will reduce the inventory and work in progress. The danger is reducing it too much. And this is why the word fragile was suggested, because fragile is like, you have to get to that level where it doesn't break. And I'll have to remember the name of the guy that decided the best way to know whether something was necessary was to remove it to see whether it broke, And he had these inventions. You take like a refrigerator and just keep taking stuff out until the thing broke, right? Yeah, I mean, we'll get back to this idea of resources. We should not be running resources, people, right? Sorry, again, shouldn't be calling them resources. With people, we should not be running people to 100% utilization. We shouldn't be trying to get more out of them. In fact, the best flow occurs when everybody has enough time to be able to absorb variation in the process. And that means they're relaxed at their work, they're not stressed, they don't make as many mistakes, you don't get rework. You've got enough buffer of time to be able to deal with the work, even when there's a slight variation in the flow. Yeah. Because if you're 100% maximized and there's an increase in supply or of supply, then you get stressed. We call that overburdening.
Mm-hmm.
That's muri, isn't it? Muri, yeah. Overburdening, the Japanese word.
I think where John comes from, if you look in 82, the guy that actually came up with the word lean was a guy called John Krafik. Yeah? And what he couldn't work out, this Toyota phenomenon, but what he said, it was so less blindside inventory, less parts in stock, and it was less, not less people, by the way. He never ever mentioned that. And he said, less, I'll tell you what, I'll call it lean, less of. And I think John's right, is you have to do that balance. In the early days of Vauxhall, the line side stock was that much, it was that high, you couldn't see the production line. I couldn't see when I first joined, where's the production line? And there was stock to the ceiling, line side. Now, as you know, it's built per car. The car, you have a dolly that's built in the stores, all the parts for that car, put on the side of the conveyor and it goes with it. But I think that's the key for me is you've got to take that bit away that we're trying to make it easier. John will tell you, easier, better, faster, cheaper is what we use in Lean Six Sigma. But it's making it easier. But that does raise suspicions then. You want to make my job easier?
I'm interested. Nicholas Talib Nassim wrote a brilliant book that influenced me, Black Swan, which is about improbable events and how often improbable events actually happen.
Yeah.
But he also wrote the book Anti-Fragile.
Okay.
And I think this idea of fragility or anti-fragile is really interesting because I take your point, JR, that some organizations are stacked to the gunnels or spare inventory or indeed redundant or out-of-date inventory, which is terrible. But we also live in a global economy where everything is run so efficiently with just-in-time that, for example, the war in Ukraine, the COVID, immediately there's a systemic problem of flow across the entire globe. And you have empty shelves literally within days. Everything's just in time. How do we get lean enough to be efficient and effective just in time, but sufficient fat, spare, surplus capacity to weather the storm, to see us through difficulties? How do we take account of that when we're thinking about lean as a philosophy as much as a process?
Which one?
Well, it's expanding the system in further out, right? We think of the system initially as the whole company instead of the silos within the company, and that's a step in the right direction. But then you have to expand out and think of your suppliers and your customers, the wholesalers, the retailers, how they're getting it from the store to their home, the transport system. And the supply chain in general. So the only way to make things lean without risk, because you're talking about really what is the risk if you are lean, that you will be too fragile.
Yeah.
You want to be robust, you like. How can you have a robust system which also has just the right amount of inventory and not excess inventory, not wasted inventory? How do we have it without overproduction? And that's to expand so that people understand the whole supply chain at the end of the day. Now, every worker doesn't have to understand the whole supply chain, but at the moment, plenty of CEOs don't understand their supply chain, and they're ignorant of it. So what do? They overcompensate because they don't understand it, and therefore they They overreact. They want to be on the safe side. The way it should be is that you have transparency in the supply chain, that people that are in your supply chain are trusted. Again, the word trust. Do you trust your customer enough to tell them when you are low on inventory? Right? Are you going to get punished if you tell them, or will you get rewarded for being transparent? At the moment, there's too much cards to the chest, not letting you know what you are doing, and as a supplier, and then that happens with your supplier and their supplier and their supplier, and what happens is everybody starts producing. Everybody starts bloating the system, overproducing. It's called the bullwhip effect. That the actual oversupply gets bigger and bigger as you go up the supply chain, and you end up with oversupply at one end and maybe not enough at the other end. So you don't want to ask me about what the solution is, because I'll tell you what I believe the solution is, because I just wrote a book on it, and that is using blockchain technology.
I knew he'd sell his book.
Sharing information, right?
Well, that's a brilliant segue, because I am really interested in AI, and blockchain is a route into that. So let's come on to that in just a moment. JR, do you have anything to sort of add to this, the entire supply chain end to end?
I think when John says the entire supply chain, is that bit of trust. And, whether it's a car manufacturer, whether it's any manufacturer, it's having that trust, but being able to be transparent with the individual suppliers all the way down to the raw product. Because
the mine that's producing the iron ore.
Because if a mine's, to give you an example, and the car industry does this very well, wiring harnesses. Okay, wiring harnesses, which are nice big things that go in every car, generally have a 6-week lead time. So they're coming from China on a boat. So you have to get it right. And I have to be honest with you, that there's now and again when we've hit a problem, when the Suez Canal went a bit, and we had to fly stuff in by helicopter and stuff like that. But generally, car giants, the big ones, have got it right. And it's that trust and transparency. And that, I don't want to keep quoting Toyota, but I can't help going back to it. They are embedded in their suppliers. Before they make a change, or they're going to run short, or they're going to stop, they talk to the suppliers. It's like that in European plants now, to an extent. But what I'm trying to say is, John's going to talk about his book now, but it's the fact is you've got to get it right. Them harnesses are hefty things, and it's coming on a boat. You can imagine if you stop and you're in sequence, you're in line sequence, so there could be a part on its way to you that's chassis number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's already booked for that car. So you have to get it right. And I think the car industry have got that right. I really think they've got it real spot on. But it's a trust and transparency with your suppliers all the way down to the raw material.
Which is a perfect segue to how we integrate systems and technology. And do you want to talk about that, JD? And then an opportunity to expand upon that, given your book on blockchain. And for everyone watching, all links to all the books that we've been mentioning will be in the notes underneath the podcast. So you can find his book here. JD.
Well, it starts with the fact that the world has become very digital. That computer systems now control most of what we do. Data is critical to every process. Information from that data, knowledge from that information is critical. Trusting that data is critical. The security of the data is critical. Who knows what? Who shouldn't know what certain information is very important. So the fact that we're now in a digital world means that our digital control systems have to be that much better than they ever have been. And one of the largest problems with our digital systems has been centralization of the data and lack of or poor sharing of the data. So the data loses synchronization, or you lose data integrity. The data can't be trusted. It's corrupted. It can be changed too easily to the way that you'd like to see it rather than what it actually should be. And this has happened extremely quickly. We're talking in 20 years, things have accelerated from physical systems to digital systems, and we didn't keep up with the technology. We were still using centralized databases. We're still using Excel spreadsheets to run businesses, right?
Yeah.
And there's these silos of data all over the place, and lots of waste in transferring data. So what you want ideally is one data system which a particular supply chain can trust is the truth. What is the true state of the system? You also want it so people feel comfortable sharing data without giving away intellectual property, trade secrets, this sort of things. You have to agree what should be shared, what shouldn't be shared, who has the rights to see it, who doesn't have the rights to see it. But it's agreed at a sensible management level that this is what we will share. This is what needs to be shared. These people can see it. These people can't see it. And that technology can be done without blockchains. It can be done, but blockchain technology does it very well. It's built into blockchain technology, or is all the security by design, the transparency by design. You don't have to take an existing system and then build upon it or change the existing system. It's already at a base level an excellent design for doing what we wanted to do, and that is share information across multiple stakeholders in a system that all have a common goals. They all want to do it less expensive. They all want to do it faster. They all want to do it with less defects, less mistakes. They all want to do it that way, but none of them will agree at the moment on using the same system which will achieve it. I'll take a breather there.
I think the one word, how many times has it come up? We don't like trusting things. We with all bank accounts, John's doing something with OPEX tokens now, which is a new thing the ILSSI is doing. And we've got all these members, and John talks about it, and they go, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." I mean, I moved computers, I think, last week. It's like getting through Fort Knox to get back in. The complex compared to your password on a bank account, it's nothing. I said to John, I had to remember 12 phrases that I found on another. So what I'm trying to say is this word on everything we talk about, trust, really does come up with the silo mentality, with the biggest blockchain. But it certainly, for it to work, we've got to let go a little bit. And we're human beings, and we're not used to that, particularly with our data. We're all, knowledge is power, isn't it? Knowledge is power.
It reminds me of a phrase: systems and standards are great. That's why there's so many of them. That challenges standardization and having an agreed protocol on how we work together, which is, standards is fundamental to trust, and vice versa. We've had a very broad and wide-ranging conversation. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. If I invited each of you to think of a scenario, a case study, an experience that you would like to share to people listening, and to talk a little bit about the conference coming up in April, What would be the case study, the story, the anecdote that you would reflect on in your career that perhaps personifies some of what we've said today in our conversation?
I'll talk about the automotive one, but could be applied to anything. I'm not going to talk about specifics because the industry was in, you can't share. But to give you an example, when you have a problem, and we had a discussion today, John and I, you need to understand the size of it. So you can imagine my problem was, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but a bolt collapsed. A vehicle collapsed, the chassis, brand new car. So you've now got this car there. So using data, the one thing is no matter what you measure, whatever it is, you've got to have some qualifying data. Demon always said, without the data, you're just a person with another opinion. That's all you are. So on that specific one, my challenge was, we've now got one car affected. We don't know when the bolt went in the vehicle. Well, we got a rough. We don't know when the bolts were made. I had to freeze the compound of 7,000 vehicles. And the only way was a scope of looking at it, as John would say, step by step. So the first thing we did was went to the line, remove the stock. Yeah, that's what you do. Get the stock, put fresh stock in. I spent the whole night in the laboratory working with teams, going back, going so many chassis numbers forward, so many chassis. But it's all for me. I'm not going to go into detail of, at them time we weren't using Demiac. But at the end of the day, not one car left the plant because I did it methodically. And I think, John will tell you, when you're doing a Lean Six Sigma project, you have to do the detail. A lot of people come in with problems in today's world and think they know the answer before the problem solving is started. Correct, John?
I think that's very wise advice. Fundamental to getting the right solution is a deep, deep understanding of the problem.
Yeah.
JD, what would be your reflection or anecdote?
Well, I'm going to choose something that's not manufacturing because a lot of people think about Lean and Six Sigma only applying to manufacturing. Look, it applies very, very well to healthcare. It applies very, very well to government services. And it's in the news, right? Trying to take waste out of certain governments. Efficiency is the word that we use a lot, right?
Yep.
But hasn't been used so much in British politics, right? How to make things more efficient. Again, we're scared of that. It's all about customer service, but it doesn't matter about efficiency. So another area would be airports, and airports. What is flowing in an airport? What is the unit of value that we're trying to achieve? And that is the movement of people from point A to point B. So using lean principles, the idea is to remove queues, or in America they call them lines, standing in line. Removing bottlenecks, slow down delays, obviously, right? Cancellations, very bad. Now, Heathrow Airport Authority in London, the UK, had the worst record for flight delays and cancellations because of fog, or London fog. But it also it had a lot of delays because of headwinds. And now this is happening in a lot of airports, but when you get strong headwinds and planes cannot travel at the same speed coming in, what happens is that the air traffic controllers were therefore keeping them at the same distance, because they would come in at like a 2 miles between each plane, approximately 2 miles. And with strong headwinds, they can't travel as far. So this means that you get delays, and that means missed flights, missed connections. So this is a lean problem. It's about how to get aeroplanes in faster throughout all these different conditions. So how do you make it more robust? How do you get over these environmental concerns? And it was a very good lean type project, because the people that had to be involved with people like the pilots, the meteorologists, air traffic controllers, different airline representatives. And as I say, the problem was that if you kept planes at the usual 2 mile distance, then planes would not get in as quickly. So after much analysis of the current state, a lot of measurement went into it. The root cause was discovered as this being the strong headwinds causing the planes to be delayed, and that step in any Lean Six Sigma project is to come up with the root cause. Slowing down there. The solution then turned out to be relatively simple. The solution was to, instead of bringing the planes in on distance, to bring the planes in on time.
Mm.
So the time between each plane coming in was the same, but the distance was shortened because the planes were moving at a slower speed. And this reduced delays and reduced delays by 50%. Just that one change.
Wow. Wow, that's a big difference. That's very impressive. And really interesting as also being a sort of an area where perhaps we wouldn't necessarily think of lean. It's a really good application in an environment that perhaps is unusual to the average viewer. So I'm very grateful for that.
Tim, if I one thing really, it doesn't matter what the problem is. It's protecting your end customer and gaining that customer satisfaction. It can be, as John's already said, it can be in anything. And that customer could be the person sitting on the next desk. That's where people have to, quantify it. It doesn't have to be the massive, that was a fabulous one about the airport. But if you could resolve an issue between two people because the invoices are slow, but they work together, find out what the invoices now get back to a speed. It's people. I think people overcomplicate it sometimes, and it's not.
I think that's a perfect note on which to close. It's that focus on the customer. Yep. It's adding value that the customer themselves value. JD, JR, thank you both very much indeed, which has been fascinating, entertaining, educational. We'll include links to the books. And I greatly look forward to the event in April. Thank you very much indeed. We'll include links to the event in April. Final word from each of you. JR, your passing thoughts?
It's been an interesting conversation, Tim. I've really enjoyed it. And I just think people listen. The conference is not like any other conference. It really is not like any other conference. We're very relaxed. We're very polite. We're not in silo mentalities, that's for sure. We work together. And the vast experience from across the world will open some people's eyes.
JD, as chair, I suppose it falls to you to have the final word. So your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Tim, for giving us this opportunity. And yes, we would like to see as many people get introduced to Lean and Six Sigma by getting in touch and participating with ILSSI, International Lean Six Sigma Institute. Our conference this year is April 29th, 30th in St. Helier, Jersey, the Channel Islands. And if you want to take away one phrase that would sum up what it is to be Lean and Six Sigma, is that we make things easier, better, faster, and cheaper. And that was not invented by me. That was the great Shigeo Shingo.
There you go,
That was back who was an architect of the Toyota production system. And what he said was it should be in that order. Therefore, you make things easier, and then things go from there. And the last is less expensive or lower cost. That is the consequence of doing things the right way.
And I think if I could just jump on one, is people got this mindset that lean is automotive manufacturing. Lean Six Sigma, if there's people and a process, it can be applied.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you. Have a good evening.